Hello, I'm Arik Korman, Communications Director at League of Education Voters, and a parent of a fifth grade son in the public school system who receives special education services. Like many of you, I'm trying to do coronavirus triple duty, working, parenting, and teaching from home. In case you're not familiar with us, League of Education Voters is a statewide nonprofit working with families, educators, and leaders to provide a brighter future for every Washington student. Our website is educationvoters.org. We believe that education is a tool for justice. The project of dismantling the systems that perpetrate the violence and oppression experienced by communities of color begins in schools. We believe every child deserves an excellent public education that provides an equal opportunity for success. In order to achieve this, we must pursue radical change in our school systems for equity, justice, and liberation. We must build schools and systems that honor the humanity in every student. Welcome to our free online webinar series, Lunchtime Webinars. We started this series 7 years ago to share information and build knowledge on important and timely issues. Today's webinar features superintendents from across Washington state on racial equity and learning during COVID-19. As guidelines for reopening schools in the fall are being finalized, school districts across Washington state are now focusing on racial equity while implementing continuous learning plans. And students, parents, and educators are trying to navigate new systems and expectations. In this webinar, we are honored to have Seattle Superintendent Denise Juneau, Spokane Superintendent Shelley Redinger, Everett Superintendent Saltzman, Federal Way Superintendent Tammy Campbell, North Kitsap Superintendent Laurynn, and Freeman Superintendent Randy Russell, who will share how racial equity is being addressed during this historic time, describe which approaches to continuous learning are currently working, outline what we need now to support school districts in Washington state, and answer your questions. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. You'll notice a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. This is the space for you to submit questions to us. As always, feel free to send any feedback about the webinar quality to us on the chat function or at info@educationvoters.org. Since we have a limited time with the superintendents, we'll jump right in so we can have time for Q&A at the end. Welcome, Seattle Superintendent Denise Juneau, Spokane Superintendent Shelley Redinger, Everett Superintendent Saltzman, Federal Way Superintendent Tammy Campbell, North Kitsap Superintendent Laurynn, and Freeman Superintendent Randy Russell. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate it. So let's start with the very first question. How are you addressing racial equity during this historic time? And Superintendent Juneau, I'd like to start with you if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, we all know that this is going to be one of the most important things that we figure out going forward. You know, in the midst of all this closure, I think this really is the one silver lining that we have about having to seismically shift the way that public education does business. We have in Seattle Public Schools, and I know all the superintendents on here as well, have a really strong commitment to our core about making sure that students of color, further from educational justice, those that have been marginalized historically, have a seat at the table and in fact sort of rebuild around the needs and rebuild our systems around those needs. And so in the midst of all this, and I see that as well, the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, the guidance that they just rolled out also has that as a top priority. And so we will be, I mean, we've been doing a lot of that deep work. We've been working with our communities of color, trying to make sure that their voices are centered in everything that we're doing. We have our work groups, have students of color on our work groups to make sure that their voices are being included in our deliberations about reopening. Our strategic plan, Seattle Excellence, our theory of action really is steeped in racial equity. And all the decision making that we've been doing throughout this entire process, we've been staying committed to that mission of making sure that we are centering those voices, making sure that we're rebuilding systems. And so in the midst of all this, I think that really is probably one of the very few silver linings we have, is to really think deeply about how we are addressing the issues and sort of a restart of sorts of looking forward of our restructuring.
Great, thank you so much. Let's go with Superintendent Russell from Freeman. We'll go from the biggest district to one of the smallest in the state. How are you addressing racial equity this time?
Yeah, thanks, Arik. Well, I'm both discouraged and I'm encouraged. I'm discouraged that in 2020 we're still having to have conversations where we're better than that. We're better than that as a school district. We're better than that as a state, and certainly would expect that we're better than that as a nation. I'm also encouraged because I do believe there's a great opportunity to continue to look at not only our students, but our families and what's important around these tough conversations that have to take place. And speaking as a white, 50-some-year-old leader, I need to step up my own game and do a better job, of leading our school district, having those conversations. In Freeman, our demographics are changing. We started as a small rural farming community. And over the last couple of decades, we've really changed a lot in terms of our demographics, in terms of the students that we're serving. And we just need to do a better job. And we need to engage in these difficult conversations, because it doesn't matter what county or school district, state, or part of the country that you're in. We just cannot continue to have the same conversations about racism and oppression in our country. Everybody deserves a chance to be treated, with respect and with dignity. And I think, as I speak for, our colleagues that are on the call, we're all committed, to not only doing our part as leaders, but to doing a better part as leaders to make sure we're doing everything we can to make a difference. And I think it starts at the kitchen table. I really does. I think that the kitchen table conversation, all the way to the boardroom conversation for us as leaders, is the very most important conversations that we can have. And then we need to be able to influence and have positive impact in the middle as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Superintendent Russell. I appreciate that. Superintendent Redinger, what's happening in Spokane?
Well, I agree with everything that has been said. If there was a silver lining, it really is this. It really put the spotlight on our work that needs to be done in Spokane. We've had work groups going. We've been partnering with the NAACP and the ACLU. But it's been slow and steady work, but it just really hasn't had the impact. So this really put the spotlight on the fact that we have many learners that we really aren't meeting their needs. And we've known that. And so our board took a really bold step last night, as a matter of fact, and passed a very far-reaching resolution that's going to have a huge impact on the education that students in Spokane will be receiving in the future. So everything for an equity lens, equity policies, we're modeling it after quite a few things that Seattle Public Schools is doing, but it's a really exciting time, a historic time in Spokane Public Schools. And last night we had over 300 people attend the Zoom meeting and over 60 people speak on their excitement for this. So if there is any good that's come out of it, I do think it is that piece, but we do have a lot of work to do, and we made sure that we had a timeline, a real strict timeline. So a lot of things are happening in coordination with reopening schools. So that's a little bit about what's happening in Spokane Public Schools. Truly, we're trying to really, for the first time, I think, get excellence for everyone. We've had that statement on our wall for years, but I think it's actually going to happen now.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Redinger. Dr. Saltzman, what are you doing in Everett?
Thank you. Well, first of all, we have a great deal to do. We've done some good things, but we have a long way to go. And it does start with the courageous conversations. I, again, compliment my school board for their resolution the other night, but it has to be real work, right? And we have to hear the student voice, and we have to have actions. We have to look at what we've done and how we get better. And it's very important that we listen to our community members, and that these conversations, like Randy said, start at home, but these are conversations that don't stop in September and October. They have to be ongoing. It has to be a culture, okay? One thing that we're going to be doing is re-implementing a strategic plan that really addresses equity and hearing from our stakeholders, which is our students, our parents, our community. And we have to admit that we have to get better of what our practices are.
Great, thank you so much. I'd like to go to Dr. Evans in North Kitsap and then Dr. Campbell in Federal Way. And Dr. Evans, what are you doing in North Kitsap?
So I will give a lot of credit to our board as well, who adopted our strategic plan last June. And one of the primary goals is to achieve equity in terms of access to education as well as educational outcomes for all of our students. We're very uniquely positioned here. I have 2 sovereign nations within my school district boundaries. The relationship between the sovereign nations and the rest of the community has not always been a very positive one. We have worked really intentionally to bring our sovereign nations into the conversation and to really talk about the tribal identity of a lot of our students and to bring that into the classroom for all of our students to gain perspective on that. We've also been working to stand up a committee that involves community, staff, and students who are centered on talking about what equity means for us, how we're going to be defining that, and then how we want to go about that work on a broader level. I was distressed when COVID happened because it felt like a lot of that really important work kind of came dead stop as we began to deal with the pandemic and how we were going to educate students and just get learning at a distance underway. While the events of the last 2 weeks have been absolutely tragic and have just been incredibly distressful, I am glad that it is kickstarting this conversation back into the forefront of our work, especially during a time right now where we are going to be doing some radical changes to how we educate kids. And for this concept of social justice and equity to be a primary driver of how we go about that work is something that I have a vested interest in, and I know that our community is now fully embracing, and I'm looking forward to being able to continue that work in that way.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Evans. And finally, Dr. Campbell in Federal Way. How are you addressing racial equity during this historic time?
So the first thing that I will say is that it isn't an event. This is about a way of life and a culture in your district. So about 5 years ago, we adopted our strategic plan, and each one of our big, bold goals had an equity look for. And so we've hardwired that in our strategic plan. I will also say it's about professional development for everybody. So from our bus drivers to our office staff to our principals, we have done racial equity training for the last 4 years. We've also adopted a racial equity policy that was in place. Our board just made a huge sort of statement to our community about what we stand for, being an anti-racist organization. We're the most diverse district in the state of Washington, the 5th most diverse district in the nation. So it makes sense that we'd have these core values articulated. But I think it's about, you got to have the courage when it's off season, not when something big is happening, to say everybody's going to be doing some learning about who they are. And we make sure we integrate that work. So at our principal meetings, at all of our trainings, we have a red thread of racial equity woven in. So then COVID happens. This is us going deep. We've got a lot of work to do. We're not there yet. Some pride points are our grad rates. When we look at our African-American students, they're almost now at the same level as our white and Asian students at 87% grad rates across the district. But to see those students of color articulating and matriculating at the level that they are. The other pride point is that we are a district that is outpacing the region in terms of the number of students who are in AP, IB, and honors classes, and specifically for kids of color to be doing that. And as a result of that, we see very high college going rates in our school district. So you hear me talk about culture, professional development, training, teaching, but results, looking at what those results are, because it's easy to turn the conversation on when the spotlight's on, but what do you do when it fades? And how do you have a culture so that these things are happening every single day in your district? And that's something that we're really proud about in our school district, and our strategic plan has driven that work over the last 5 years.
Yeah, I would just add on, I mean, Tammy's right on. It's like, we've also, been driven by our strategic plan and the commitments that are outlined in the strategic plan, and really have been, Salem Public Schools was engaged in racial training before I came, right? And so there's just been a lot of deep work around, our cabinet has engaged in book readings. We've had guests come in and teach extended cabinets, all the managers across our central administration, and sort of just really engage in these dialogues. And then principals, our school leaders have been engaged in racial equity training. And so it is like the thread that runs throughout everything. And even I think in our planning coming back, that is first and foremost the considerations that need to be made. So yes, a lot of great work happening, a lot of understanding and learning happening, but we always have to have that growth mindset about where is it that we are going and how are we going to make sure that all of these issues come to bear in every decision that we make. I would just give a shout out to our school board as well, have a racial equity policy. They are now currently working on an anti-racist policy for us to become an anti-racist organization. So they're having, they have a draft policy, they're going to be pushing that out. So just a lot of deep work going on and looking at all the data, right? And making sure that we're measuring we have to measure the right things and make sure that we are working on those deep issues to make sure everything sort of falls in place, similar to work.
I want to just add one real quick thing that I think is probably core to what we've been doing. Every school has a scholar advisory, a group of students who advise the principals, and we make sure they're diverse. Student voice is often forgotten, but they're the key to help teach us how to teach them. And I've asked principals to also have the similar structure with these scholar advisors with parents that are diverse. We have to put ourselves next to the folks we're trying to serve, and we've got to do that frequently. Again, not when something happens, but it has to be a part of how we do business.
Yeah, I know all of us can agree on that. And we instituted the Department of African American Male Achievement last year. That executive director has a African American Male Student Leadership Council. They are now on our reopening teams, and so they're integrated into those conversations. It's been super important and like really making sure that we're digging in and listening and all of the decision making that's happening. So thanks, Tammy, for
thank you. And what Tammy said, it's not an event, right? It has to be a culture. You have to have these conversations. Our principals, our assistant principals, our teachers, student voice is key. And then you have to have real action, right? Because if you don't, it'll never sustain. And this has to be ongoing, right? And I really want to call that out. It is not an event. And that strategic plan drives the work every day. And it's got to be every day.
Yes, very well said. And I hate to pivot away from racial equity because it really is the top issue right now, but I also wanted to make sure we had enough time to address remote learning and COVID-19. So what I'm going to do is, in the last few minutes before we open up to Q&A, we'll combine those other two questions. And basically, I'd like to know what approach seems to be working well for your district with remote learning during COVID-19? And at the same time, if you have something that you'd like to put out that we need to do now to support districts in Washington State, something that perhaps we could do at the state level, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And I'd like to start with Dr. Redinger in Spokane. What seems to be working and what do we need right now?
Well, we were happy that we had purchased quite a few laptops with our bond and levy dollars, so that helped. And then the community really stepped up and helped us with feeding families as well as getting access for technology. We still have a long ways to go on the technology for fall, and that will be a big focus of our work as we're moving forward. I would say I'm just very proud of how hard our teachers have worked. That has been amazing. We've really seen that the students are hungry for that face-to-face, even if it was on Zoom. They wanted that interaction and to have that. So that's been a huge piece for us of success. I think going forward, this probably won't come as a surprise to anyone. I'm a huge supporter of a nurse in every building. And I wish, talking about what Cammie had said, why did we have to wait for it to come to this? It should have been there all along. But I think now we need it more than ever. You know, a nurse in every building, social emotional supports, and being proactive. So that's what we need in Spokane.
Great, thank you so much. Randy Russell and Freeman, not far from Spokane. What's working and what do you need?
Yeah, we've been very fortunate. Things have actually gone fairly smooth for us. Thanks to the support of our community, we got to a one-to-one initiative last year. So we had a little time to work some of the kinks out, and we were out of school actually for one day. By the time the students left campus to the time we were able to do meals and take care of childcare and provide learning for students. It was about a 24-hour turnaround. Now we're a smaller school district, and so we're a little easier to navigate at that level. But I'm just really impressed and thankful for our staff and our families. There's a lot of pressure on educators. There's been a lot of pressure on families, and to see how many families and staff members have stepped up to the plate and really, not just through communication and their relationship, but also it's been a real collaborative effort. A lot of great business partners in our communities as superintendents where people have been willing to chip in. And I think there's also a great opportunity in every difficulty. And I really see this as a great opportunity for all of us, because we need to continue to improve in education across our system in Freeman. And I think my colleagues would agree with that. This is an opportunity that maybe you are forced to do something earlier than you actually had anticipated or wanted to do. And I see a lot of positives coming out of that. There's still a gap, certainly in Freeman, like there is across the state. And we've got to work, harder to make sure that that gap does not exist. But, whether we have students on campus, face to face the first day, which is our hope, or we have to do some type of hybrid or digitally, we're ready. We're ready right now. We could have had our students back on campus, I believe, before school got out in Freeman. We weren't able to do that. However, we will be ready to do it. And I think that this has been a really great opportunity for teachers to learn and deliver teaching and learning in a different way. I think our teachers are going to come back in the fall better educators than they were in the spring. And I think families are going to be better equipped, but I truly believe we're going to have to keep a close eye on our students and our families just because of fatigue going into the fall. And so that's something we're going to pay particular attention to in Freeman.
Great. Thank you so much. Dr. Evans, what about North Kitsap? What's working? What do you need?
Like others have said, we're very fortunate in that we had a levy pass and a capital levy with technology in 2018 that allowed us to purchase almost 2,000 devices for kids. In a district of 5,700, that's a significant investment. And so we were able to get devices out to all students. I agree, our staff have just risen to the challenge tremendously. It's been incredible to watch them adapt on the fly and to truly reach out to our kids, both on an emotional level and also on an academic level, and continue to build connection. I believe that we have a real need here. I'm semi-rural and we have issues with broadband access. And I firmly believe that, like water and power, internet access is the next utility that needs to be a fundamental right for all. And if we can find a way for the state and federal government to get behind that, I believe that will radically level the playing field in a number of ways for our learners. Whether it's COVID or not, we are in the 21st century, and our kids who are in elementary school may very well see the 22nd century. We need to provide internet to all of them because that is becoming foundational to our instructional flow. And without that, we are setting kids up for a huge disadvantage. And I feel it is ethically and morally wrong. So to me, that's the big thing we really need to be successful moving forward.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Evans. We'll go with Dr. Saltzman in Everett, then Dr. Campbell in Federal Way, and then we'll finish with Superintendent Juneau in Seattle. Dr. Saltzman, what do you need? What's working?
Well, I first will have to compliment the teachers because they did amazing work, and having 2 students in the system and being here with them all the time, they were amazing, and the board for having the fortitude to have the technology. But I think one thing that we're missing is we're going to have to really have a parent university for our parents, right? Because we throw this work at our kids, and there are parents that are working, okay? And we have to have some opportunity for them to get that training. It's vital to this work. And if we don't do that, then we're not helping anybody. So I think that's crucial. And I think that when we do come back, there is, like Randy said, there's going to be fatigue. So I think we're going to have to look at social emotional learning and really make sure our teachers and our kids together and administrators ease back into this, okay? Because this is different work, right? We didn't write the book for this. You didn't go to school for this. I think we all go to school to impact children, hug children, love children, And the Zoom world's different. I never met any of you before today, but I see you on Zoom. And, you know, so I think that's a component that we cannot forget, because interaction is crucial. And when we do the process of re-entering, we're going to have the parents and student ear and teacher ear at the table, because a lot of things are going to come very fast to our communities, and we're going to have to get their input as we enter back, because it's going to be extremely different. But again, I can't compliment enough the staff and the teachers. Think how the teachers and students started the school year in August and how they had to end. That was a monumental effort for everybody. So we have to remember that.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Saltzman. Dr. Campbell, what's working and what do you need in Federal Way?
So the first thing I want to start out by saying is that we know the best way to serve students is face-to-face in the setting with the teacher and the student in the presence of content and community. We know that's ideal. So no matter what we're doing right now, it is not going to be enough. In fact, what it has done is exposed inequities in a way that are just sometimes heartbreaking. We provided, 5,000 laptops, 1,000 hotspots, and we still, in addition to those things, found that there were students who did not engage. Because for a lot of the folks who can engage, usually, especially younger students, have a parent at home who can do that work right alongside them. And no matter how hard our teachers are working, and they did incredible, heroic work, there are gaps that are created because of what's happened, and we've got to recognize that. And so we're trying to we've pulled together a team right now with parents on it, to ask parents, since they were doing so much teaching at home themselves, what kinds of supports do you need? And they talk about consistency, not having one set of teachers do it this way and another do it this way, and I've got 2 students and I'm learning 2 ways. Consistency in platform, consistency in our approaches. And there were some real things we learned from them, which is why we're thinking about how we reopen with them, because they are going to be critical partners. Also expecting principals to have much more complex, authentic ways to engage with families, like having them have a monthly Zoom meeting with their parent community to check in, not just sending out an email, but use Zoom with your parents. Here, let's have your parents in the chat box tell you real time. I've been doing that every 2 weeks, and I have to tell you that has been the best thing I've ever done as a superintendent. And they're telling me right now the kinds of things that we could do to get better. Here's the other component of COVID-19, and I want us to start by modeling the racial equity conversation. COVID-19 and racism are all woven together. Our Black parents and our Black community are disproportionately impacted by it. And also, we're having this racial virus that's happening right now break out across the country. So when our kids come back and their parents are coming back, they're coming back after marching, after talking about equity, after talking about institutional racism. They're coming back to our classrooms. And we need to be prepared to have that conversation with them in a learning environment, just like we're going to be talking to them about the routines of walking through school, social distancing. It's interwoven and they cannot be bifurcated. And we need to start thinking about that right now. The other component is we've got to be ready for this continuous learning to be portable and ready to go. So how do we learn from our parents and our students right now about what worked and what didn't? And what I found is the more frequent the communication, as much as teachers were creating community through Zoom or various mediums, then parents and scholars felt connected. So we're working, and I've been talking to the University of Washington and peers about what are those 5 or 6 things that really good teachers do in an online context that we want to be sure we can guarantee training on for our teachers. And then we're going to look at parent academies, some small vignettes to tell parents how to navigate Canvas. How do you work if you're going to go back to this model again, if schools are closed, what does that look like? And PD for parents, so that we're paralleling that PD with the PD that we're doing for our teachers as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Campbell. I know, Superintendent Juneau, you've got to go soon. You all do. But
yeah.
In the last few seconds here.
I couldn't agree with what everything that's been said here. And so I just really want to appreciate the school leadership right now is really difficult. And so just a shout out to my peers across the state. We are in a position where any decision we make it's going to be questioned and just really hard. And so it's a hard job right now. And so I just really appreciate everyone's leadership. The 2 things that I will say is that we also surveyed our parents. 80% of the respondents to that survey said there's going to be a need for mental health and SEL because of the trauma that's been suffered throughout this closure. And of course, all the historical trauma and pain that's come up because of the recent events and the protests and such, and so, or the reasons for the protests. And so there's going to be a huge need for that. And I could not agree more with Superintendent Evans, and I know we all agree, broadband for all, period, exclamation point, has to happen, has to happen. Otherwise, all these issues we're talking to it's going to be so much more difficult. And so I think any support from the state or the federal level, the primary conversation has to be about broadband for all, because that wraps up all of these issues into that one single content. It's like none of the learning can happen. The SEL supports are going to be difficult. Racial equity is going to be hard to address until we have access to internet for everybody. It's just like it has to happen.
Great.
Thank you, Denise.
Yeah, thank you, all of you, because I know you all have to leave. You have board meetings, you have other meetings. Thank you, Seattle Superintendent Denise Juneau, Spokane Superintendent Shelley Redinger, Everett Superintendent Saltzman, Federal Way Superintendent Tammy Campbell, North Kitsap Superintendent Laurynn Evans, and Freeman Superintendent Randy Russell. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. You addressed many of the questions that came up during the Q&A function. There were a few about wraparound services, special education, as you can imagine. So for those of you who had questions that weren't answered, in the follow-up email, I will provide the email addresses for the superintendents so that you can follow up if you like. Again, the superintendents, thank you so much. I'll let you go now because you've got other things to do. Thank you for all the work you do for Washington students, and I hope the rest of your week goes well, especially as the new guidance for reopening schools has just come from OSPI. All right, and as I said, the follow-up email addresses will be coming up to the email which you should receive in about 24 hours. Also, League of Education Voters has gathered resources available in communities across Washington to help us get through this difficult time. Everything from meal services, distance learning resources, school guidance from OSPI, and college and scholarship supports to mental health supports, internet and technology resources, childcare, and employment resources. You'll find our COVID-19 resources page on our website, educationvoters.org. Our next LEVinar will be on Wednesday, June 17th, and it will be our very first Spanish language webinar. A panel of educators from the organization Parents as Teachers will talk about how education has been impacted by COVID-19, describe how to teach through play, share learning schedules based on children's ages, and provide coping strategies to use during these stressful times. You can register by visiting our website, educationvoters.org, click on events, then lunchtime webinars. I'll also send registration information in a follow-up email. Also coming up on June 26th, Treehouse CEO Lisa Chin and Chief Policy and Strategy Officer Dawn Rains will share how their nonprofit organization took immediate action to respond to the challenges of COVID-19 and outline how we can best support students in foster care. Thank you to each of you for joining us today. If you have additional questions or comments, please send them to me, Arik, at educationvoters.org. That's spelled A-R-I-K, at educationvoters.org. A recording of today's presentation will be available on our website, educationvoters.org, and will be sent to you in the follow-up email, which, as I said, will land in your inbox in about 24 hours. Please feel free to share that recording with your friends and colleagues. If you'd like to learn more about League of Education Voters or support our work, please visit our website, educationvoters.org. Thank you again for attending. Each of us has the right to feel safe and valued. Together, we will fight for a world in which true educational and economic equality exists, and equity even more so. We look forward to seeing you at future LEVinars.